The cheat sheets for this boss fight will actually be 4. One with general information and one per phase, shown in the appropriate order. I would have condensed this further if I could, but as you might know, this fight is complicated. And with that out of the way, welcome to my guide to fighting the Chainsaw Consultant. If you're sick of relying on others to lead you through this fight, or it's your first time and you just want to be in the know, regardless, I am here to teach you how to fight Chip Revington, the Chainsaw Consultant. Due to how overly complicated this boss is, the format of the video will be somewhat different, mostly focusing on his overwhelming amount of cheats and how to deal with them, with quick footnotes on gags. Timestamps are in the description as usual. If you're here for just one specific thing, feel free to skip to it. Otherwise, let's get into the very beginning with the story/taskline. Chainsaw Consultant is the Acorn Acres Kudos Manager, meaning you must be on the rank 9 to rank 10 rank up task, I saw what I chainsaw, in order to fight him. Good old Gil Giggles tells you he's heard about a new experimental kind of suit that Cogs Inc. has been working on, and he wants you to go get insider information about it. He tells you to go crash one of the CEO's banquets and listen in on the Cogs gossip while serving them. Functionally, this is serving 5 hungry diners in the waiter round. They have to be hungry specifically, so don't slack on the server round. Afterward, you return to good old Gil Giggles and you tell him that you found out the experimental hardware is some kind of function that flips like a switch. He tells you to go talk to Professor Pie since she's apparently heard some ruckus on Walnut Way. You go to Professor Pie and she tells you that she wants to make sure you're ready for whatever's in there and wants you to take down 3 6-story boss bot buildings. That's right, a CEO and your stock options back in the same task. This easily makes it the longest 9 to 10 rank up task in the game. And after you do those buildings, you return to Professor Pie. She says she's impressed with how far you've come and how you made short work of those buildings, and then says the ruckus was coming from Cut to the Chase Logging Co. at the end of Walnut Way. This is where the battle against the Chainsaw Consultant takes place. I will be letting the cutscenes play out in full, including phase transitions. Final warning for spoilers. Kind of heavy stuff. I genuinely feel bad for him. Hope he gets a redemption in a future update. And before we get too deep into this, allow me to show off his 2 drops, both very rare, a sticker of him holding a pink slip just for you, and a smaller version of his hat. Quite awesome if you ask me. On to the general stuff for this fight. The Chainsaw Consultant is a level 50 boss bot manager with 12,000 HP. That sure is a lot, but nothing well-prepared toons can't handle. He has 4 attacks, shown here, and as for content sync, the only one is restricting you to a maximum laugh of 143. All rewards are usable. What gags should I bring, I hear you asking? There are 2 common ways to approach this fight, one with sound and one without sound. The one without sound is much more common, but with sound is not to be discredited. Here's a couple common setups for without sound. If you are bringing sound, it's pretty much the same loadout as the ones I just showed, except only one toon should take Squirt, and the other 3 should be Squirtless but have Zap. Everyone should take sound. I will discuss when to use sound at points when it's needed, which I will say right now will be rarely in Phase 1, a few times nearly guaranteed in Phase 2, and rarely in Phase 3. Keep in mind these are example builds. You don't need to follow them exactly, whatever works for you and your party is good enough as always. On to general stuff for this fight. Right off the bat, you'll probably immediately notice the big bar on the right side of your screen. This is the RPM meter, and it is key to understanding this fight. What does it do? Universally across every phase, depending on how high or low his RPM is, he is capable of using or incapable of using certain cheats. For every checkpoint the arrow passes, Chip will gain access to a new cheat. On top of that, the higher the RPM is, the more damage he will do that turn in phases 1 and 3. In phase 2, the higher the RPM is, the more damage he will take. He gains RPM by being hit, being 1,000 per hit taken that turn. Lure counts as a hit for this purpose. He can only lose RPM by using cheats. Again, for Phase 2 specifically, the meter is inverted, and he will take more damage the higher the meter is, and can take lowered amounts of damage if the meter is particularly low. In Phase 1, you absolutely do not want him to get to the top of the bar, while in Phase 2, you absolutely do not want him to get to the bottom of the bar. In Phase 3, getting to the top of the bar is inevitable, but the punishment is severely lightened in comparison to Phases 1 and 2. There's also no punishment for getting to the very bottom of the bar in Phase 3. One last thing before moving on to cheats, he transitions from Phase 1 to 2 at 8,500 HP, and from 2 to 3 at 4,750 HP. Starting with an in-depth explanation of how Phase 1's cheats work, I will order them from the top of the bar to the bottom. Deadwood, 20,000 RPM. Chip fires all toons out of a cannon, booting them back out to the lobby. This is effectively an immediate loss. Do not get this unless you are confident you can make him transition into Phase 2 immediately after he gets it, as he will simply transition to Phase 2 and not use Deadwood. Keep an eye on the RPM meter to make sure that whatever your team is doing will not cause him to cross this threshold. No matter what you do, if he has the RPM to use this, he will use it, unless you force him to transition to Phase 2. Of note is that this is the only attack in the game to send toons out of the fight without making them go sad. Marked Wood, 17,000 RPM and costs 7,000 RPM to use. Chip throws a log of wood at a toon, reducing them to 1/3 of their maximum laugh and making them take 75% more damage from all attacks Chip does toward that toon. If another toon does not hit Chip, he will also automatically target said toon. This will only do 1 damage if you are below 1/3 of your maximum laugh when it hits you. Triggers. This cheat is triggered by any of the following. Number 1. A single toon hits Chip. Lure does not count as a hit for the purposes of Marked Wood. Number 2. All toons hit Chip. Lure does not count as a hit for the purposes of Marked Wood. Additionally, if Chip is at 19,000 RPM, do not use this method. Number 3. A toon uses an IOU. He will automatically target the toon who used it, and other toons may do anything they want in the turn the IOU is being used without fear of punishment. The IOU is the simplest, but one toon hitting him is pretty easy considering Lure doesn't count as a hit. If you want to do all 4, then you should probably soak him, or the cog next to him if it's lured, so it's guaranteed, then 3 zap, or 4 zap if he's already soaked. Splash damage counts as a hit for both Marked Wood and RPM gain. This is important to keep in mind, for example, when the cog next to Chip is lured, so you can guaranteed soak Chip by targeting the lured cog and the rest can zap. If you do this, save your Teslas and lightning bolts. You want Teslas and potentially lightnings in Phase 2, use spotlights and TVs if you really need to. Cut the Slack, 14,000 RPM, costs 3,000 RPM to use. Chip disintegrates all but 1 cog from the fight, and that 1 cog gets promoted heavily up to a 30 executive. A cog can be promoted less if there's less than 4 cogs alive when it happens, and a cog can be promoted beyond a 30 executive only if they'd already been promoted to a 30 executive when Cut the Slack was used. Triggers. If 0, 2, or 3 cogs are killed, this will activate if he has RPM for it. Killing all of the cogs is impractical unless you bring sound, and quad fogs or a combination of fogs/operas would kill them. This is frequently the most use you'll find out of Trap in Phase 1 because its high single target damage can usually kill a cog. Save your TNT. Anything else is fair game, including your wrecking balls. Just save your TNT. Also, in general, if Cut the Slack happens early, either trigger Offboarding, the cheat will be explained next, and eat the damage, or restart. It is not good to have a 30 executive early on. Offboarding. 12,000 RPM, costs 2,000 RPM to use. Chip fires a cog out of a cannon at a toon, instantly destroying the cog. The amount of damage this does is equal to 3 times the cog's HP times the percentage of HP the cog has. For example, a 30 executive fired from offboarding with 1072 HP out of a maximum of 1488 will do 65 damage. Triggers. The two ways to trigger this cheat are either firing a cog with pink slips or damaging a cog but not killing it. In the case of firing a cog, it'll target whoever used the fire, and in the case of damaging a cog, the targeting is random. Most of the time, when you see this, it's because you squirt Chip and do splash damage to the cog next to him. Easily is least threatening cheat, though do be wary of when you use this to get rid of a 30 executive. If you're doing so, damage the cog with a trapdoor or wrecking ball at bare minimum, so it'll do less damage. Whipsaw, any RPM. If no other of Chip's cheats activate in a turn, Whipsaw occurs, which gives him 2,000 additional RPM. This will inevitably happen, just keep it in mind when calculating RPM. As a general rule of thumb for Phase 1 strategies, here's a summary of what to do depending on his current RPM. If he has enough RPM for offboarding and no other cheats, you can trigger it if you want to delay the next marked wood for a little bit by reducing RPM. This is not always useful, but is nice to keep in mind if you're having a rough time keeping everyone's laugh up. If he doesn't have RPM for cut the slack, wail on him with lure and throw or squirt and drop. If he does have RPM for cut the slack but not marked wood, kill a cog, lure and or tune up as needed, and hit Chip. If he has RPM for marked wood, figure out what method of activation you're using, and remember if you IOU, then others can hit him or otherwise do as they please in the same turn, as he will always target the person who used the IOU with marked wood. Additionally, if he has RPM for marked, keep in mind it has the highest priority other than Deadwood. If you meet a trigger condition for marked and cut the slack in the same turn, he will use marked wood. Finally, do not let him hit 20,000 RPM, ever. If you do whatever you have to do to get him to Phase 2, even if that entails hitting him with a raw quad piano. No harm in trying, considering he doesn't make you go sad. As stated earlier, when Phase 2 occurs, the bar flips upside down. Now you don't want it to get to 0. Additionally, the higher the RPM is, the more damage he takes. If it's below 15,000 RPM, he'll start taking less damage than usual. I will start with a special cheat and then start at his 10,000 RPM cheat and go up the bar. Throttle, phase transition version. In the transition between Phase 1 to Phase 2, Chip will use a special version of Throttle. This slams cannons down on every toon, dealing half of their current laugh. This means it can't kill you unless you're at 1 laugh, and as such you shouldn't unite for it unless someone is at 1 laugh. This gives all toons a 25% damage vulnerability for 2 turns. The only trigger for it is a single time when Chip enters Phase 2. Throttle, 10,000 RPM. If Chip has 10,000 RPM at the beginning of the turn, he will use the normal version of Throttle. This does 50% of your maximum laugh, meaning if you're at 50% HP or less, you will go sad unless a tune-up unite is used. Also applies the same 25% damage vulnerability to all toons for 2 turns. The only trigger is if Chip hits and stays at 0 RPM for 1 turn. Spark Plug. Costs 2000 RPM, otherwise has no RPM requirement. Chip zaps the highest laugh toon, dealing 20 damage every turn for 2 turns. Triggers. This cheat is activated when no triggers for other cheats are met in Phase 2, and he can't use it 2 turns in a row. Aggrandize. 13,000 RPM, costs 3,000 RPM to use. Chip promotes a cog, much like Cut the Slack, but it doesn't sacrifice other cogs. In addition, the promoted cog now takes half of all damage Chip would take for him, and it can't be suit or fire like a manager. Triggers. The cheat activates if you damage a cog without destroying it, much like Offboarding, with the additional triggers of suing a cog, there only being one cog left alive, and he will also automatically use it after Sparkplug if no other cheats are activated and Sparkplug was used last turn. Overall, this is significantly less punishing than Cut the Slack, but you probably don't want it happening too often regardless of that. Chainlink. 15,000 RPM, costs 2,000 RPM to use. Chip links every cog together. This gives every cog to the right of another cog a 25% defense boost, stacking depending on how many cogs are to their left. In the case of Chip with 4 cogs to his left, this is a 100% damage reduction. He can no longer gain RPM while linked. This makes Chainlink a ticking throttle time bomb if you aren't fast enough about killing the other cogs. Additionally, he cannot use Chainlink or Sparkplug while linked. Triggers. If all 4 tunes hit Chip in a single turn. Lure counts for this purpose, unlike Marked would. And I hear you asking, well, why would I ever want to activate that? On to our next cheat, Kickback. Chip takes up to 30% more damage for 2 turns. Triggers. Destroy all cogs affected by Chainlink, other than Chip of course, or destroy an executive that is level 20 or higher. The latter method is almost never used, so I saved this cheat for Phase 2. Will be a lower damage value if you use fires to destroy linked cogs, so just zap the linked cogs from left to right until they're gone. Scabbard. 17,000 RPM, costs 7,000 RPM to use. Chip heals all allied cogs for 50% of their maximum HP, frequently overcharging them. Triggers. Not hurting or destroying any cogs in a turn, or suing a cog. Has a lower priority than chain linked, so either trigger link or kill a cog like you do with Slack. In general, you do not want this cheat going off, like ever. It's bad. If Scabbard does go off, the best thing to do is sound or zap the cogs. Even if it doesn't kill, they won't be overcharged anymore, and that's what matters. Here's some basic things to keep in mind depending on RPM in Phase 2. If he is at 0 RPM, it is paramount that you get him some RPM as soon as possible. Be above 50% of your max laugh when Throttle is about to hit. This phase is all about getting him to high enough RPM for Chainlink and activating it to make use of Kickback. That is your primary goal. Once he has Kickback active, do something like Soak plus Daze, then 4 pianos on the next turn. IOU setup if you want. You do have 2 turns after all. Aggrandize is not the end of the world. It will almost certainly happen at least once or twice per run, if not more. It's okay, even if an Aggrandize cog lasts into Chainlink, you'll be fine, since you have to kill it before Kickback activates. Again, Scabbard is really bad. Not quite end of the world tier like an early Cut the Slack, but never let it trigger ideally. Having him at high RPM in this phase means more damage. Keep him at or above Scabbard RPM when Kickback is active if possible. This is more achievable if you plan RPM gains/losses in advance. Related to that last point, Whipsaw does not occur in this phase at all. If he can't use any other cheats, he'll default to Sparkplug or Aggrandize if he used Sparkplug last turn. In Phase 3 of this fight, the override takes control again, and now you are dealing with it on the offensive. The bar flips back to normal, and there is one key change to this phase. When Chip hits 20,000 RPM, he uses a new cheat called Layoffs. Aside from this new cheat, the phase functions identically to Phase 1. Layoffs. 20,000 RPM costs 7,000 to 10,000 RPM to use depending on the amount of cogs present. Chip fires cogs out of cannons at the toons respective to their placement in the fight. This does damage equal to 4 times the cog level times the percentage of their HP, like Offboarding, but stronger. For another example, a level 11 at 100% HP will do 44 damage. Layoffs will happen if he is at 20,000 RPM, unless he is dropped to 0 HP in the same turn. It takes utmost priority, like Deadwood. All other cheats are the same as Phase 1, meaning the same strategies you apply for Offboarding, Cut the Slack, and Marked Wood work here. Here's some Phase 3 specific tips though. Layoffs are inevitable unless you spend the entire fight tiptoeing around it. Sometimes you will have to eat layoffs, and that's fine. Just be ready to take the damage. A 30 executive cog promoted by Cut the Slack will do a whopping 120 damage if at full HP when layoffs happen. If you need to reduce the damage, trap or zap that cog. And if you're zapping, be sure to hit Chip with it as well. A viable alternative to simply tanking layoffs from a 30 executive is to trigger offboarding on a healthy toon and tank that instead. This will do 90 damage maximum, much less and easier to plan around. But again, keep in mind if he's at layoffs RPM, he will use layoffs. Prestige tune-up is a godsend in this phase, as frequently there will be multiple people in need of a tune-up, and the more you're healing, the less you'll have to use tune-up later, and the more you'll get to damage Chip. When Chip is at or below 960 HP, or 720 if you have one Zapalus, you can use lightnings to kill him. It's often worth using a gag-up zap for this purpose if you don't have your lightnings still. Having someone who can do quick math for layoffs damage and type it out in chat can be useful for knowing when and when not to use a tune-up unite. And just as a general rule, on the off chance somebody is marked by Marked Wood and you're about to eat layoffs in the same turn, there's a very high chance the marked person will just go sad immediately unless they're at max laugh. I believe I have gotten everything in this fight, except for some highly specific things involving RPM and his attacks in phases 1 and 3. So I'll say a few things pertaining to that now. Last bit before the outro, I swear. Anyway, this is just a spreadsheet detailing some numbers Chip's attacks will do at different RPMs in phases 1 and 3, and how much more damage you deal to him depending on how high his RPM is in phase 2. This will be linked in the description if you want it. The RPM goes up to 30,000 in the sheet, as that's higher than the highest I've ever seen it get. If you're somehow in a situation where the RPM is above 30,000, do the math yourself, and also know that I hope that you somehow win that fight. As always, thank you very much for watching. To the new players, I hope you succeed against Chainsaw Consultant, and to the not so new players, I hope I helped you learn something today. Shout out to the fine folk who showed up in this video. The next guide will be on Plutocrat, as voted by y'all. Peace.